What we're talking about today are real lives and real people, not just numbers on a balance sheet. And what I'd like to address briefly here is why we are in this predicament today. How did we get here? You know, we look at states across the country right now, there are about 45 of them that have some kind of serious budget deficit problem. We in Texas have got one of, if not the worst in the nation. So the question is why? We've heard from our leaders that our economy is doing better than most states. We haven't been hit as hard by the recession. Yet almost 1/3 of our budget is in deficit. So what happened? How did we get here? There are several major reasons we have the budget deficit we do today, but the overriding reason occurred by an action of our legislature and our state leaders 5 years ago. I'd like to read from a letter that was written to Governor Perry. Copies were sent to the Lieutenant Governor, Speaker of the House, and all members of the legislature. It says, "Dear Governor Perry, your plan is fiscally irresponsible and it leaves the largest hot check in Texas history. At this moment, this legislation is a staggering $23 billion short of the funds needed. It will relegate Texans to draconian cuts in critical areas like education and health care for at least a generation. It is a sham, and Texans will see it for what it is." This letter was written by our state controller, Carol Keaton Strayhorn, on May the 15th, 2006, to Governor Perry, Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst, Speaker Craddock, and the legislature. Unfortunately, the legislature passed that so-called tax plan. In her projections, she says that in 2010, the budget would be $4.9 billion short, and in 2011, it would be $5 billion short. And the fact is, we know that's true. Today, we have a $10 billion structural deficit, and it's growing. It's growing every session. I'm president of the Take Back Texas Alliance, which is a recently formed nonprofit group, and we're dedicated to marshaling public support for increased revenues, because they're absolutely critical to our state's future. Not only to avoid the cuts in House Bill 1, but to avoid an even bigger deficit 2 years from now, and frankly, to avoid the destruction of our state government. The tax plan that Mrs. Strayhorn referred to occurred in 2006 and was called a tax swap. The problem is the swap didn't work. As a result, we have a permanent hole in our budget that is growing and growing and growing. House Bill 1 cuts education by $7.8 billion, public education, or 15%. It cuts higher education by $1.5 billion, or 7.5%. It cuts nursing homes by 33%. The problem is, we've gotten here because of poor financial management. Our leaders knew back in 2006 that we had a hole and it was going to grow. But they did everything they could to keep us from knowing about that. They used budgetary gimmickry. They used the fiscal stimulus funds in 2009. And despite all of that, we still ended up with a $4.3 billion deficit for this fiscal year, which ends August 31st of 2011. The problem is, if we don't increase our revenues, we're going to be facing economic calamity. Last week, you might have seen the headlines in the newspapers. All the major dailies in Texas, it was the front page story. The Legislative Budget Board projects that we're going to lose 335,000 jobs in the next 2 years as a result of House Bill 1. Our unemployment rate is going to rise 2.3%. Our gross state product loss will be $19 billion, and our personal income will go down $17.2 billion. I submit to you there's no way you can possibly balance a budget with those kinds of projections, knowing your income is going to fall even further. Folks, we're on a downward spiral. Today, Texas spends less per capita than any state in the country. We're dead last, number 50. That's today before the budget cuts. If these cuts become law, we're going to be blazing into uncharted territory. We're basically going to become a backwater state where no one wants to live. Our quality of life is going to be lousy. Our schools are going to be horrible. We're not going to have enough money to perform the basic services that everyone expects, including the business community. It's going to be bad for business. It's going to be bad for everyone. And yet our leaders inside are hidebound by an ideology. They've forgotten who they represent. They work for us, not an ideology, not themselves, and not the special interests who help elect them. Not one member of that body in there ran on a platform of destroying 335,000 jobs. Not one member of that body in there ran on a platform of cutting public education by over $8 billion and firing 100,000 teachers. Not one member of that body in there ran on a platform of wiping out a majority of our nursing homes in Texas and killing vital state services. Not one member in that body ran on a platform of destroying 911 service in our communities across Texas. They have the gall to tell us that they're doing the will of the people, and we know that's not true because the people had no idea this was coming. What we have to do is to hold them accountable and let them know that we know that revenues are absolutely critical if we're going to save our state, both short and long term. I urge you to join us in this effort. It's going to require time and money and a lot of work, but I'm convinced we can do so. There was a public opinion poll that was run at the beginning of the legislative session that indicated that slightly over 50% of the people in Texas knew we had a serious budget problem. Today, that number is over 80%. Public opinion is truly changing. And I believe once House Bill 1 changes and people understand what's behind this deficit, support will grow for increased revenues, and our representatives and senators will hear that. I urge all of you to talk to whomever you know. Write, send emails, call your representatives, let them know how you feel about this issue. The fact is, our state population has grown 3 times faster than our state revenues have in the previous 9 years, from 2000 to 2009, 3 times faster. And this information is provided courtesy of Representative Mike Villarreal from San Antonio, who has been a hero to those of us who want to understand the budget, who want to understand what we must do to correct our fiscal house. I attended a town hall meeting that he conducted in San Antonio last weekend, and it was extremely informative. Some other information that he shared. Our franchise tax raises less than half of what it was projected to raise in 2006. In 2008-09, the hole in our budget was $6.8 billion. 2010-11, it was $12 billion. This time, 2012 and 13, it's $27 billion. It's doubling every biennium. Can you imagine what kind of shape we're going to be in 2 years? Is it any wonder our state leaders don't want to spend the rainy day fund, because they know that we're developing a hole that is so massive they'll never be able to dig out of it. It's up to us to make them realize that there is no choice. We have to fix this hole. We have to increase our revenues. If we don't, the very future of our state is at stake. In closing, I'd like to share a little information about our tax code itself. Texas is 42nd in the nation in overall tax burden as a percentage of personal income. We're 11th in the nation as a percentage of personal income paid in local property taxes. Over the years, local property taxes have been relied upon more and more and more to fund public education because the state has not upheld its end of the bargain. While all this is going on, our tax code has 227 exemptions, exclusions, and discounts. We have $66 billion worth of exemptions in our tax code today. If we simply eliminated 1/3 of those and used the money remaining in the rainy day fund, we would solve our budget hole, we would solve our deficit problem, we would not be facing the cuts we are today. That is the question that our leaders must answer. Are they going to do what's right for Texas? Or are they going to do what some ideologue tells them to do? And it's up to us to let them know we, the people, are the employers of our representatives, and we need to let them know what needs to be done to save our state. Thank you very much.